The March of Time. Among all the rivers in the United States, the little Monongahela plays the giant's role in the output of America's most important industry, steel. This peaceful river, which meanders for 128 miles through the Alleghenies, is the major link between two areas which constitute the industrial heartland of America, the great coal and steel producing centers of West Virginia and Pennsylvania. It is a river rich in contrasts. 19th century stern wheelers still paddle its length, doing the same job as modern diesels. The richest coal deposits in the world, deep in the Allegheny Mountains, yield an almost endless supply of energy that provides the backbone of the nation's powerful industrial plant. The great steel producing centers situated on the banks of the Monongahela. At the river's mouth, Pittsburgh, steel capital of the world, stands as a symbol of the power generated along the Monongahela. To trace the course of that tremendous power, one must go upstream to the source of the river, beyond the borders of Pennsylvania to the hills of West Virginia. Mile for mile, the Monongahela is the busiest river in the country. Each year it carries 32 million tons of cargo, almost as much as the Panama Canal. Though it lacks the majestic sweep of more impressive streams, the very smallness of the old Mon, as it is called by riverboat men, gives the river its character, its homely traditions, and its friendly atmosphere. Here at the junction of the West Fork and the Taggart Rivers, in the low hills of West Virginia, the Mon has its beginning. Near its source, it runs between high hills, the origin perhaps of the Indian name, which means river of falling banks. Here the stream is so narrow that towboats pass within hailing distance of each other. A third of the towboats on the Monongahela are paddle wheelers, vivid reminders of bygone days on the river, but still just as useful for pushing coal barges as their modern rivals, the diesels. Originally, the Monongahela was hardly navigable, except by the canoes of the Indians and the flat-bottomed ferries of the pioneers. But today, a system of dams and locks deepens the channel to a minimum of 7 feet from the mines in the West Virginia hill country to the mills on the banks near Pittsburgh. Now the shallow draft towboats can traverse the entire length of the river by passing through its 12 federally operated locks. The abandoned tipples of worked-out mines serve as landmarks on the journey upstream toward newly developed coal beds. But booming activity is the rule. Most of the industries along the banks of the Mon are operating at full blast, taxing the river's transport resources. The hills and mountains through which the Mon flows are a rich source of other raw materials beside coal, like sand and gravel, which swell the flow of traffic on the river, particularly along its lower reaches in Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh, the focal point of Monongahela Valley industry, is the destination of coal-hauling towboats which work the river. The Mon flows north. To reach its source, the boats travel south, passing many busy little industrial communities. The whole life of these towns is centered about the river, which provides cheap transportation for their products. The story of the Monongahela towboats begins deep in the Alleghenies, in the heart of the rich coal country. In the mines along the banks of the Mon, miniature trains carry the miners, sometimes for miles underground, to the open faces of the coal seams. The days of pick and shovel work in the mines are gone. Today, modern machinery lightens the miner's burden and increases his productivity. This giant cutting machine and other modern mining equipment has helped to increase the daily output of coal per miner in the United States by 32% in the past 10 years. Mines in this area yield a rich grade of bituminous, commonly called soft coal. which has a low sulfur content that makes it highly desirable in the production of steel. The mines of western Pennsylvania and West Virginia exploit what is known as the Pittsburgh seam, the most valuable single mineral fuel deposit in the world, which was discovered in 1759. The first coal mining along the Mon began in the early 1800s. Today, mechanical equipment digs the coal, raises it to the surface, washes it, and dumps it into empty barges in a single continuous operation. The barges which carry the coal down the Monongahela are pushed by both paddle wheelers and diesels. Bill Cunningham, captain of the Shanapin, a modern diesel, has been a riverboat skipper for 28 years. The Shanapin's normal run is from Vesta Mine number 5, owned by the Jones and Laughlin Steel Company, to the J&L Mill near Pittsburgh. Today's barges carry 900 tons of coal each and can be loaded in as little as 20 minutes. At the mines, deckhand Bill Rice, who was born and raised on the Monongahela, cuts loose the empties from the towboat. As a so-called captive mine, all the output of Vesta number 5 goes to feed the furnaces of the Jones and Laughlin Mill. The Shanapin, which is one of the fleet of towboats and barges owned by the company, makes the run from the mines to the mills in about 10 hours under good conditions. Speed on the turnaround is a factor in an operation that enables the Mon to carry more than 26 million tons of coal a year. So no time is lost in picking up the loaded barges for the run down the river. Before the trip to the mill begins, the barges must be securely lashed together. First, the 6 barges are assembled with heavy lines. These lines are pulled taut around timber heads until all the loaded barges are warped in close together. Steel cables and chains are then added to secure the assembly. Deckhands on a riverboat must be as handy as any seagoing sailor. The 6 barges are gradually tightened into position just in front of the Shanapin until they form a double row of 3, lashed together side by side. When the assembly has been completed, the 6 barges form a solid prow just forward of the Shanapin, about 600 feet in length. Ready for the run to the mills, the Shanapin moves quickly into the stream. With his payload organized and underway, Captain Cunningham can relax somewhat during the first leg of the journey down the river to Pittsburgh. From the vantage point of the pilot house, the river daily unfolds its changing scene. Despite the decades he has spent on the river and his change from steamcraft to diesel, the captain still enjoys watching the stern wheelers churn by. Although he prefers piloting his new diesel. As he scans his instruments, a light flashes him a warning.
Hey, Homer. Better look around down there. I got a red light showing in my face there. It must be something stopped.
Homer Cantor, the Shanapin's chief engineer, is an old steamboat man, too. But nobody on the river today understands a diesel motor any better than he does. To Cantor, the engines of the twin-screw diesel sound like a purr compared to the pounding of the old steam engines he used to work on. Cantor has served on riverboats for 42 years, ever since he was 14 years old. He still prefers the old steamboats to the modern diesels, a view which Captain Cunningham does not share.
I'd rather be on diesel because on a steamboat, we were sitting up there, we didn't know if we were going to get float up in the air or what. And we have a better basin here, we have the steam flying up there on us. foggy nights and the smoke blowing down your face. We can see. We've got a clear view.
All in all, you think it's safer than?
I do, yes. I like it. I like diesel. I thought I had it about 40 years ago when we was coming to the prime of our lives.
Life on the Monongahela now is quite different than it used to be. Today, there are women on board the towboats which ply the old Mon. Mrs. Violet Oster, known to the crew as Mickey, has brought her own brand of home cooking to the galley of the Shanapin. Woman's touch is also evident at the mess table, where Josephine Bennett takes over. Rivermen are traditionally heavy eaters, and the members of the Shanapin's crew are no exception. The mess has a food allowance of $4.50 per day for each man, so she is able to include in her menus good cuts of meat and plenty of fresh vegetables. Rivermen in the old days were often recognized by what came to be known as a steamboat figure. These days, the men eat just as well, but they watch their diets a little more carefully. On the Shanapin, the crew can count on being served well-balanced meals. Today, with women aboard, the tone of the conversation at the mess table has changed somewhat. And at dinner on the Shanapin, the crew is as well-mannered as any family gathering. Even the old-timers who fondly recall the days of another era on the Mon seem to welcome the refinements which have been added to riverboat life. The usual watch on board the Shanapin is 6 hours on and 6 hours off. When the boat approaches one of the Monongahela's many locks, all hands on duty must turn to. There's a lot to be done in a very short time, and a mistake can result in damage to a barge or to the lock itself. Near Elizabeth, 24 miles upriver from Pittsburgh, the heavy traffic at Lock 3 usually causes a slight delay. Before the Shanapin can enter the lock, the water level must be raised. The gates at the lock's exits are closed, and the water let into the lock until it reaches the level of the river on the upstream side. In approaching the lock, the Shanapin must be maneuvered carefully. As the barge load is brought into line with the lock gates, a workman releases a float to see if the water is level with the river upstream. The lock tender then signals all clear. Cunningham answers. And the lockmaster tells him to come ahead. A single control sets the mechanism in motion, and the gates swing open against the current from upriver. Towboat loads have outgrown the capacity of the Mon's old locks, and the Shanapin's barges must be taken through in sections, 4 first, then 2. This means that the first 4 barges must be pushed into the lock and pulled through by means of winches. Captain Cunningham sends the Shanapin slowly ahead between the jetties at the lock entrance. At just the right second, he must cut his engines and bring his heavy load to a halt. The clumsy barges slip into the lock without even brushing the walls on either side, a tribute to Captain Cunningham's long experience as a towboat pilot. There are often only inches to spare between the barges and the lock walls as the tow comes to a halt. Much of the river was an impassable series of shallow pools with rocky shoals between them before the Army engineers built these dams and locks. Lines are passed around timber heads on the lock walls. Once the barges have been lowered to the downriver level, they will be pulled out of the lock by winches without the help of the Shanapin, from which they must now be cut loose. Bill Rice quickly unleashes the first 4 barges, and the Shanapin backs out of the lock entrance to wait until the lock is clear once again. The massive lock gates are closed on the 4 barges, so the water level within the lock can be lowered to the downriver stage. Once the barges are drawn through the gates, they are tied up at a jetty beyond to await the Shanapin, which is now able to enter the lock with the remaining 2 barges still lashed to its prow. Watching the smoothness of this operation, it is hard to believe that it can be difficult and dangerous. High water and low water are both problems. In floods, the Mon sometimes reaches a stage of 40 feet, 30 feet above normal. And there have been cases where a train of barges and their towboat have been swept over a dam. During dry seasons, shoals present a dangerous hazard. But the channel depth is being increased from a minimum today of 7 feet to a minimum of 9 by improvements in the system of dams. A barge laden with 900 tons of coal today can still scrape its keel along the Monongahela's rocky bottom. Clearing a lock in good weather takes Captain Cunningham as little as a half an hour. Once the Shanapin is beyond the gate, the barge train can be reassembled and the towboat gets underway for the next leg of the trip to the steel mills. Mileage markers on the banks give the distance from Pittsburgh. But an old hand like Captain Cunningham knows almost every bush and every tree along the shore. Sometimes the schedule allows for a brief stop at places like Morgantown. For the crew of the Shanapin, such pauses provide a welcome breathing spell and an opportunity to stretch their legs. Morgantown is a typical mining center, set in the hills along the river, gray and drab, but with a few bright spots like Vince's, a restaurant and tavern frequented mainly by miners and riverboat men. Dorsey Lewis, who works in the mines, is always willing to sing his own composition, which he calls the Skeered Coal Miner.
I will never be a miner. I was once, I'll never be again. I will never be a miner. For I'm afraid mine for me. Now, when I was about 17 years old, I took a notion to want to load coal, and I took a little trip up on Coal Knob to ask the boss to give me a job. Shoveling black diamonds. Didn't have no better sense. I bought me axe and a saw and a pick and a hard shell cap that fit too quick. They all said it'd stretch, but it didn't. I was greenhorn days as a kid, and the joke was on me. I won't ever be a miner. I was once, but I'll never be again. I won't ever be a miner, for I'm afraid of my fault.
Many of the rivermen have worked in the mines themselves and can sympathize with the sentiment in the song. The riverboat men get along well with the miners, and the talk soon turns to the old days. Cunningham and his crew never tire of the arguments over diesels versus steamboats. And when all else fails, there are always the legends about the old-timers on the Mon and the exploits that have kept the stories of those days alive.
Steamboat very different nowadays than it was in the olden times, Captain.
Yeah, it is. In the old times, when I first started, they had wooden barges. Now they've got steel barges. The old fellow says in the olden times they had the wooden barges and the iron men. Now they got the iron barges and the wooden men.
Another favorite topic is the traditional steamboat race. The last one was ruled a tie, and the men are still arguing over whether or not the ruling was a fair one. These breaks on shore come all too seldom for the riverboat men. One of the worst hazards on the river is fog. With 600 feet of barge in front of him, the captain stations Pat Gaynard forward to watch for other craft approaching in the mist. By hand signals, Gaynard warns the captain of a boat coming upriver off to starboard. In such weather, Captain Cunningham sounds a warning blast every few seconds. Off to port, another towboat overtakes the Shanapin and her tow, passing them at high speed in spite of the morning mist. Today, the fog begins to lift early, but there is no time for Captain Cunningham to relax. From here on to the end of the journey, the river bank is studded with steel mills and river traffic is heavier. Smog from smokestacks is often thick, and there are dangerous bends in the river. One of the worst of these is Greenfield Bend, a sharp curve on which visibility ahead is poor. Another hazard for the riverboat captain is cross traffic on the Mon, as at Simpson's Ferry near Greenfield Bend. The ferry, which links the towns of Newell and Coal Center, is a small craft worked by a gasoline motor with room for only a couple of cars at a time. When the ferry is in motion, its cable rises from the river bottom. But at the approach of a towboat, the ferry pilot can drop the cable to avoid the possibility of fouling the towboat's propellers. The ferry carries workers back and forth from Coal Center and other nearby communities to a plant near Newell. From the deck of the Shanapin, the industry which makes the Mon important is readily apparent. This is the shipyard where the river's coal barges are made. Farther along, the Carnegie Mills empty waste into the river through a sluiceway that forms a minor cascade. From the vantage point of a timber head, an important segment of America's industrial might now passes in review. These are the steel mills and foundries and chemical plants which draw their heat and power from the coal hauled by the Monongahela's towboats. 1 ton of coal to make 1 ton of steel for processing into armor plate and gun mountings and girders for skyscrapers. At night, the panorama takes on a different aspect. Blast furnaces send out a lurid glow reflected on the river's surface. One of the most impressive sights in this steel country is the dumping of slag, the wastes and residue from the smelters and furnaces carried from the mills in what steelmen call thimbles. These oval-shaped containers, 10 feet high, are dumped automatically, sending a fiery molten mass down the ever-growing mountains of slag. The Jones and Loughlin Mill is one of the top steel producers in the country. Coal used in its furnaces must first go through the coking process, which produces a fuel that is almost pure carbon, capable of burning at intense heat. It still takes men of iron to make steel, men who can withstand the searing heat from white-hot coke fires that are used to transform ore and scrap iron into molten metal. It takes men of muscle and a sure hand, men with a quick eye and the technical knowledge needed to operate a steel mill's complex machinery. The giant rolling mills which carry a slab of glowing steel from one set of rollers to another, squeezing and drawing the livid metal into any size and thickness required. Making steel takes strong men to tap the fires and manipulate the cranes that pour the liquid metal from glowing crucibles in which the physical fiber of our strength is forged. It is men like these who make Pittsburgh, Steel Town, heart of America's industrial might, drawing its sustenance from rivers like the Monongahela, the vital artery on which the economic life of the city and the whole nation depends. These are the men who make it great. The man who makes the steel, the miner deep in the earth, and the men of the old Monongahela who provide the link between the mines and the mills, bringing the fuel that keeps the furnaces glowing, the steel pouring, veterans of many a bout with storm and flood and fog.
barge over on the port side.
Each year, the expanding industrial life of the nation makes even heavier demands on the Monongahela, which day after day fulfills its traditional function of transporting the coal from the mines to the mills. Time marches on. Each week at this hour, the March of Time presents a report on an important personality, problem, or place somewhere in the world. At this moment, March of Time cameramen are shooting significant stories in the various parts of the world. The setting for next week's show may be Southeast Asia, Western Europe, the Middle East, Latin America, the Arctic, or our own United States. The March of Time covers stories today, which will be news tomorrow. Join us again on this channel next week for another authoritative chapter in the March of Time television series. This is Westbrook van Voorhis speaking for the editors of the March of Time.